I had been working 60-hour weeks in the city and needed a break before I burn out completely. The rental listing promised solitude, 1 bedroom, a private dock, no neighbors for a quarter mile. The photos showed glassy water framed by tall pines and a weathered deck that faced the sunset. The drive from the highway ended in a narrow gravel road that crunched beneath my tires. When I parked, a hush settled in, thick enough to muffle my thoughts. The lake stretched wide and gray, the late afternoon sky low and heavy. Inside, the place smelled faintly of cedar and something damp, like earth after rain. Dust filled the window panes even though the caretaker swore he'd cleaned. That first evening, brewed tea and sat on the porch swing. The only sounds were the rhythmic lapping of water and the distant call of a loon. My shoulders finally loosened. When I turned in for the night, the silence felt almost too complete, as if the world outside held its breath. At a.m., boards creaked. Slow, deliberate steps crossed the porch. I held my breath, heart hammering, and listened. And oh, knock. No voice, just pacing. Then nothing. Sunlight through thin curtains woke me. The porch was empty, boards dry. No footprints marred the damp soil along the path to the dock. I told myself it had been a raccoon, a branch falling, anything. But by afternoon, the breeze carried something stranger, a faint susurration that rose and faded like a conversation just beyond comprehension. I walked to the dock, the wood slick under my bare feet, and leaned out over the water. It was perfectly still, reflecting a pale sky. Yet the whispering continued, circling the lake. That night, the whispers returned, stronger. A damp chill seeped through the closed windows. The bedroom door shuddered once, as if someone leaned against it from the hallway. When I flicked on the light, the house looked the same, plain pine boards, secondhand furniture. But the air smelled of rotting lakeweed, and the shadows felt aware. Rain hammered the roof while I wrote in the living room, trying to drown out the whispers with music. A flash of lightning lit the lake like daylight. A figure stood on the dock, motionless, facing the house. The next flash came, and the dock was empty. My throat closed. I grabbed my phone. No bars. The landline produced only static. When I turned back, the front door latch, which I had locked, hung open. A wet footprint marked the threshold. I backed toward the bedroom, heart thrumming in my ears. The air smelled of iron, sharp and metallic, as if the storm itself had seeped inside. I sat fully dressed in the living room, suitcase by the door. The wind had died, leaving an oppressive quiet. At exactly 3, a single knock sounded from the back door. My breath caught. I forced my voice steady. "Who's there?" Silence. Then another knock, gentle, almost courteous. I gripped the handle and yanked the door open. Cold air slid past me. The porch was empty. Only the lake answered, lapping softly against the pilings. I fled at first light. In the rearview mirror, the dock receded. A tall figure stood motionless at its end, black against the silver water. Then the trees closed in, and I lost sight of it. The road narrowed until branches scraped my windshield. Mist clung to the headlights, swallowing the last trace of daylight. When the cabin finally appeared, it seemed to rise out of the water itself, a dark triangle of wet wood and glass. Inside smelled of wet stone and old cedar. I set my bag down, noting the faint quiver of the floorboards beneath my boots, as if the house floated rather than stood on pilings. I chalked it up to nerves. Yet when I lay in bed, the silence pressed so tightly against my ears I could hear my own pulse, and underneath it, a slow, almost tidal thrum. Dawn light spilled across a lake so still it felt frozen. The dock post stood inches deeper in water than last night, though the forecast called for clear skies. I walked the shoreline. No fish darted below. No insects skimmed the surface. It was a quiet that felt deliberate. Back inside, the windows caught the reflection of the water. When I shifted, the reflections lagged a second behind, as if something else looked back. That night, the vibration returned steady, powerful, like a distant engine or a massive heartbeat. The dishes in the cupboards rattled softly with each pulse. Rain hammered the roof, a sudden storm. I watched the shoreline vanish as the lake swelled to the bottom step. Then a sound like a heavy fist striking wood. Deep below, knock. The floor trembled. Knock. Each vibration rolled through my chest cavity. I crouched, pressing an ear to the boards. Another strike boomed from directly beneath me, impossibly slow and deliberate. Through the windows, the water was black, yet shapes shifted there, wide and smooth, leaving trails of phosphorescent shimmer before melting into darkness. The water lapped against the door, seeping through the threshold. My packed bag floated at my feet. A long scrape vibrated through the house, a sound both deep and wet, like stone dragged across stone. The door shuddered once and swung inward to nothing. No rush of water, only stillness. I climbed through the back window. Cold black water reached my waist. When I turned, the cabin sagged. With a soft exhale, it sank straight down, roof, vanishing beneath a perfect surface. Below, a pale light pulsed once, then faded. Mark insisted we needed one last escape before fall. His friend was gutting an old cabin 2 hours north, and we could camp inside to keep an eye on things. The lake greeted us with heavy stillness. Pines lined the shoreline like silent sentries. As we unpacked, I noticed another dock across the cove, bigger, with a roof that sagged toward the water. The map Mark showed me didn't mention it. The gas station. An old man filling his truck muttered, "Lake takes things. Sometimes it gives them back." By midnight, moonlight painted a path across the water straight to that hidden boathouse. Its dark roofline pulsed gently, as if it drew breath. The boathouse smelled of stagnant water and rust. A single rowboat lay overturned, its paint blistered. Below the boards, dark water shifted, rising and falling as if something massive stirred beneath. We didn't linger. That night, a sharp creak echoed across the cove. Then another, measured, patient footsteps on wood. I stepped onto our porch. The moon lit the water like glass. No boat, no ripples. Yet the sounds continued, closer until they reached the end of our dock and stopped. A second rhythm began, heavier, circling the cabin in slow, deliberate arcs. Fog rolled in dense and sudden, muting every sound. Through the mist came murmurs, soft syllables that rose and fell like tidewater. I pressed my ear to the glass. Voices, garbled yet unmistakably human, bubbled up from the cove. Pale lights shimmered beneath the boathouse. They swayed rhythmically, as if someone paced the submerged floor. When I roused Mark, the lights blinked out, but the cabin's porch boards were slick when we stepped outside. Drops of lake water beaded the wood, though rain had stopped an hour earlier. A violent splash broke the morning stillness. Then a drawn-out scrape reverberated across the water, metal on stone. Through the lifting fog, the boathouse sagged and cracked. Its roof slipped silently beneath the surface. We scrambled into the car. Gravel spat from the tires. Halfway up the access road, I risked one last look. A figure stood where the boathouse had been, black against the whitening sky, motionless, watching. The next blink revealed only open water. Elise loved spontaneous trips. I loved the idea of 2 days with no email. Greywater Lake lay tucked miles off any main road, a black mirror surrounded by spruce. The house itself smelled faintly of damp stone despite fresh paint. We unpacked while dusk settled like smoke. Across the water, 3 faint orbs shimmered beneath the surface. They rose, paused, sank perfectly timed. I called to Elise. She squinted and said maybe it was moonlight on rocks. But the pattern repeated. 3 pulses. Stillness. 3 more. By midnight, the lights glowed steady, as if waiting for something. Morning brought a gray fog so heavy, we could barely see the shoreline. Out in the canoe, the water turned a color I've never seen, blue so deep it bordered black. No fish darted below. No bird skimmed the surface. Elise leaned over, listening. "Do you hear that?" A low hum vibrated through the paddle. Faint but steady. That night, the hum returned, seeping up through the floor. Every glass in the cupboard rattled in perfect time with my heartbeat. Though my pulse raced faster, the house smelled of wet metal, like pennies left in rain. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. The sound rolled through the house like distant thunder. I yanked open the door. The night was still. Moonlight glistened on wet footprints leading from the lake. They ended at the first porch step, pointing inward. Elise's hands shook as we stuffed clothes into bags. Then a deeper resonance boomed from beneath the floor, vibrating the nails in the walls. Dust sifted from the rafters. The pattern repeated, perfect and patient. The highway never felt so far. Through the trees, the lake glowed with its own dim light dot in the mirror. A shape the size of the cove itself swelled upward, featureless and black, as if the lake was lifting to meet the sky. The car engine faltered, coughed, then caught again. Kept my eyes forward until the forest walls closed behind us. Even now, lying in bed miles away, I feel it 3 slow pulses beneath my ribs, as if Greywater Lake followed me home. The caretaker dropped me off just after sunset, promising to check in when the road's clear again. The cabin was older than the listing photo suggested. Knotty pine walls, drafty windows, a faint scent of extinguished firewood. Outside, the lake stretched under a crust of ice that hissed and popped as it froze. By 10 o'clock, I'd finished my tea and locked up. When I woke to a soft creak, the back door stood open 3 inches. A new dusting of snow lay smooth, except for a single, shallow groove that ran from the frozen lake to the step like something had been dragged, yet no drag marks continued away. Each night, the lake performed its eerie symphony, deep groans that made the window glass tremble. At first, I blamed natural expansion, but soon distinct taps emerged from below. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks, like deliberate code. The second morning, a dark wet stain spread across the entry rug, though every door was latched. I crouched by the frozen shoreline and pressed my ear to the ice. A slow scraping answered, as if something immense shifted directly below. A shadow glided beneath the cloudy surface, broad and unhurried, heading straight for the dock before fading into the dark. Snow swallowed the world in silence. I stoked the fire and tried to read, but a single thud interrupted a slow, deliberate knock against the front door. Caretaker? My voice sounded small. Nothing. Another knock vibrated the hinges. I peered through the peephole, only white snow and shifting shadows. From the kitchen came a soft hiss, a breath that fogged the glass from the outside. The fire guttered though the chimney flue was clear. A cold draft slid across my ankles. I backed into the living room as the house itself seemed to inhale. Gray light filtered through the storm's remnants. The lake no longer groaned, it whispered. A faint mist floated above the ice as if warm water rose from below. I dragged my bag to the porch and heard the sharp crack of splitting ice. A black seam raced from the far shore toward the dock, opening wider with each pulse. Bubbles swirled up through the gap in a slow spiral. The entire lake seemed to exhale. A deep knock thundered across the frozen surface. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 more. I ran without looking back. When the caretaker returned hours later, the cabin door stood open, the lake unbroken and eerily still. The gravel road ended in a small clearing where the house crouched like a dark shape among the pines. Inside smelled of cedar beams mixed with damp stone. I unpacked, opened the windows, and listened to cicadas thrum against the heavy air. As sunset bruised the horizon, the lake turned an oily green, flat as glass. That's when the first ripple appeared. A single circle widened and widened as though something had surfaced for just a breath before slipping under again. I waited for a fish to leap, but nothing followed, only stillness and the faint scent of algae drifting through the window. I woke to the lake licking against the dock in slow, measured laps. No breeze stirred the trees. Moonlight stretched a path across the water, and in its center, something pale hovered just beneath the surface. At first, I thought it was a log, but it shifted a round crown, smooth and skin-like. Before I could fully register it, the shape slid down into darkness. At dawn, I stepped outside to find tiny wet footprints leading from the shore to my porch. They ended at the threshold like the visitor had paused, listening. The boards were dry where they should have dripped. The air smelled of copper and damp wood. I sat rigid as a faint tap, tap pulls through the planks of the dock. It traveled, slow and deliberate, toward the porch. When I flicked on my flashlight, a trail of bubbles rose in a perfect line from the dark heart of the lake. The beam caught nothing but green-black water. Then a whisper, thin and childish, floated across the surface. Not words I knew, only a lilting hum that tightened my chest. The boards beneath me vibrated as though something immense pushed upward. I bolted inside, bolting every window as the tapping followed. Fog clung to the shoreline, thick as wool. The car trunk groaned as I heaved my bag inside, heart hammering. The air stank of rotting weeds and iron. From the dock came a soft splash. Through the fog, a dark oval yawned open in the water center, perfectly round, perfectly still. A small figure emerged, water sliding off its shoulders like oil. Its skin glowed a sickly green, blending with the lake. Black eyes fixed on me. It raised one hand, palm upward, in silent invitation. The ground pulsed beneath me one slow heartbeat. I fled, never turning back. Weeks later, satellite images showed the lake a deep, unnatural black. The gravel lane ended at a small pull-off where pines leaned inward like a closing fist. The cabin crouched low, gray wood darkened by decades of storms. Inside, everything smelled faintly of resin and old metal. I unpacked as dusk bled across the water. The lake lay perfectly still until a low thunder grumbled beyond the ridge. I switched off the porch light to watch the lightning far away. That's when I noticed the lantern, a pinprick of warm orange across the black surface. It hovered, impossibly steady, gliding parallel to the distant shore. No boat, no sound of paddles, just the soft, deliberate bobbing of a handheld light. By the second evening, the air pressed heavy and electric. Rain threatened but never came. At exactly 11:14, the orange point flared again across the water. Through binoculars, I caught the faint silhouette of a figure, arm raised as though offering the light. I lowered the lenses for a heartbeat and the figure was gone, the lantern floating alone like a trapped firefly. Morning brought a surprise. Damp footprints along the porch boards, each narrow with long toes spread like a swimmer's. Inside, a faint smoke scent threaded the hallway, though the hearth was cold. That night, a second lantern appeared, pacing the first like a silent twin. Silence wrapped the cabin like a vacuum. No insects, no drip of water from the eaves. Then knock, knock, knock. The sound rose from the floor itself, slow and deliberate. I crouched, pressing my palm flat. A faint vibration thudded once, steady as a buried heart. Through the window, two lanterns glowed nearer than ever, their light bleeding orange into the mist. I grabbed my phone, no signal, though bars had been full that morning. A whisper seeped upward through the boards, high, wet, and curious, a melody without language. My own breath felt foreign, too loud in the cavern of quiet. The fog thickened until trees blurred into charcoal smears. As I shouldered my bag, an orange glow bloomed at the shoreline, closer than the others had ever come. A figure emerged from the lake, water streaming from its limbs, clothing dark and undefined. Its lantern burned steady, casting no shadow on the mist. Behind it, two more lights hovered like sentinels. The figure lifted one hand, palm out. The earth beneath my boots shivered, a deep, resonant hum that settled in my bones. I bolted for the car, engine screaming as gravel spat from the tires. In the rearview mirror, three lights floated above the lake until the pines swallowed the road. The house greeted me with silence thick enough to hear my own pulse. Wood floors creaked under my steps, though I walked lightly. Outside, rain polished the lake into a sheet of black glass. I stood at the picture window, sipping the metallic taste of travel from my mouth, when a light flared across the water. Not lightning, too controlled. A small yellow bulb glided from one cabin window to another like someone carrying a lantern. The summer camp had been closed for years. The drizzle muffled everything, yet I thought I heard a faint splash echo from that direction. A sudden hush woke me. Rain had ceased, yet droplets tapped wood in measured beats. I eased the bedroom door open. The hallway glistened under a faint moonlit leak from the skylight, except the ceiling was dry. On the boards, a procession of wet prints shimmered like faint silver fish scales. They began at the rear entrance and marched straight toward the stairs, each one crisp, toes splayed like a swimmer's. I checked the lock. Deadbolt engaged, chain fastened. The prints ended halfway down the hall, as if the intruder had simply vanished into the air. The house exhaled a deep, slow groan. Dusk painted the inlet a bruised violet. I sat wrapped in a blanket, binoculars steady. First came the smoke, thin, blue, rising in a perfectly vertical line. Then the glow of fire, orange and hungry, yet eerily silent. Not a crack, not a hiss. Through the lenses, a lone figure stood against the flames. Its shape wavered like heat mirage, edges melting into the background. I strained to see a face, but found only shimmering emptiness. A breeze carried the sharp scent of burning cedar, though the air around me stayed still. I blinked once, and the entire scene collapsed into darkness. Fog pressed low, swallowing shoreline and sky. While I wrestled my suitcase into the trunk, wood knocked softly from the dock. 3 deliberate taps. The lake lay smooth, no wind, no movement. Across the inlet, the shuttered lodge ignited with the sudden yellow blaze, bright as a streetlight. The glow spread through the mist, painting everything the color of old bone. Then something dark breached the water, halfway across shoulders, head, arms rising without a ripple, as though the lake had turned to glass beneath it. It stood there, featureless, lantern light swelling behind. I drove blind through fog that seemed to follow.